Hello once again. For this video, we shall be exploring financial institutions. Before we do so, let's take a short trip down memory lane. Remember in our first video when we defined financial economics? Well, this was the definition we took. This time, I am going to underscore the word uncertainty. You see, financial markets are imperfect. What do we mean by this? Well, in a perfect world, or in a perfect financial market at least, investors and borrowers will know all the accurate information needed to make a good decision. In this perfect financial market, individuals with available funds are capable of identifying creditworthy borrowers to whom they can lend those funds. Risk will be significantly reduced if not at all eliminated. But financial markets are imperfect. There is information asymmetry. Buyers and sellers do not have full access to information. Investors cannot readily assess creditworthiness of borrowers. Risk owing to this lack or absence of information is high. It is precisely because the financial markets are imperfect that we need financial institutions. They resolve the imperfections of the financial markets. They accept funds from the surplus units and channel these funds to the deficit units. When it is time for the deficit units to repay, they channel this back to the surplus units to give them back the return. In effect, when the investors and borrowers meet, the financial institutions act as an intermediary, so there is an indirect transfer. Financial institutions are formally defined as institutions that perform the essential function of channeling funds from those with surplus funds to those with shortage of funds. Upon reflecting on their nature, we can therefore point out the following specific roles that they play. They offer deposit accounts that can accommodate the amount and liquidity characteristics desired by most surplus units. They repackage funds received from deposits to provide loans of the size and maturity desired by deficit units. They accept the risk on loans provided. They have more expertise than individual surplus units in evaluating the creditworthiness of deficit units, and they diversify their loans among numerous deficit units and therefore can absorb defaulted loans better than individual surplus units could. Can you imagine what it would be like if financial institutions do not exist? Information costs and transaction costs of financial markets will be phenomenal. Since surplus units will have to perform their own credit valuation of prospective borrowers and incur the risk of default, they would most likely hold on to their funds rather than channel it to deficit units and face a high risk of default. Based on this appreciation, we can thus point out the following unique economic functions of financial institutions. Monitoring costs. If you were an individual surplus unit, do you think you'd have enough resources to assess the creditworthiness of all potential borrowers? Even if you do, it would be too costly. Financial institutions pool the resources of small savers, and because they intermediate between savers and borrowers of all sizes, they can collect information about deficit units at a relatively low average cost. Liquidity and price risk. By pooling savings, financial institutions supply liquidity to financial markets. The size of financial institutions also put them in a better position to lessen price risk. Number 3, transaction costs. Similar to monitoring costs, the size of financial institutions make it possible for them to complete financial transactions at a lesser transaction cost as compared to individual deficit units looking for a direct surplus unit. This is called economies of scale. This simply means that the financial institutions have a cost advantage because it represents many savers and borrowers. Number 4, maturity intermediation. Financial institutions can better bear the risk of mismatching their assets and their liabilities. This means that financial institutions can afford to have liabilities which are current, such as those represented by deposits from their savers, and assets that are non-current, such as those loans receivable from their clients. This is because their sources of funds are as varied as their users of funds. Number 5, denomination intermediation. Financial institutions such as mutual funds allow small investors to overcome constraints to buying assets imposed by a large minimum denomination size. It's like saying if the minimum buy is 10,000 but you only have 1,000, you obviously can't avail of the securities. But you can overcome this constraint if you pool your savings with other savers in a financial institution and have them transact on your behalf. Aren't financial institutions fantastic? But wait, there's more. Financial institutions also provide services that benefit the overall economy, such as money supply transmission. Each country comes up with its own monetary policies whose effects are intended to reach the entire financial system. Financial institutions, particularly depository ones, channel the effects of these monetary policies to the entire financial system and economy. Regulations imposed on financial institutions generally impact the financial system as well. How about credit allocation? Financial institutions are often viewed as a major source of financing for deficit units. In some instances, like in farming and residential real estate, financial institutions even prove to be the only source of financing. Then there's intergenerational wealth transfers. This service is particularly true for insurance companies and pension funds, which provide savers with the ability to transfer wealth from one generation to another, such as the case of inheritance and pension payments. And lastly, payment services. The efficiency with which depository institutions provide payment services directly benefit the economy. There you have it, the services of financial institutions. Up next, we shall be talking about the types of financial institutions and the risks that they face. Stay tuned.